In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I had a really interesting chat with Marissa Racomelara, the Director for Transformation and Change at Georges River Council, and also the Board Secretary of the Australian Smart Communities Association. We talk about how Marissa's background in criminology and the designing of spaces to prevent crime really sparked her interest in the smart cities and community space, and why she believes it is so important. Marissa shares with us how she sees Australia embracing smart concepts, as well as the necessary balance between professionals guiding smart processes and intentional community engagement and feedback. Marissa then tells us about the smart city project she's currently working on at Georges River Council and the work that we are currently doing at ASCO. We finish our conversation discussing the emerging trends of having a common purpose when collaborating and focusing on the why and the real problem solving in smart communities rather than only thinking about new shiny tech. This episode is brought to you by the Australian Smart Communities Association, and as always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Marissa. How are you today?
Good, thanks, Zoe. I'm really well and excited to be here.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you're here as well. So let's jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Ooh, I'm passionate about so many things, so that's a really hard question to answer. I guess to keep it relevant, my early career was in criminology, and that gave me some really great experiences around using data and design to influence human behaviour. So as I worked on projects really around designing public spaces to reduce the risk of crime, I became really interested in other things that design and information could influence. So things like access for people with a disability, child-friendly spaces, and areas that encourage intergenerational interaction. And as a bit of a greenie at heart, I was always looking for ways to make those spaces more sustainable, both environmentally and from a financial perspective. So my core passion is really about using multiple tools to help organisations better reach their goals, specifically in the design of spaces.
Wow, I didn't know that about the criminology background.
Yeah, it's something that surprises people.
Yeah, I think I should have asked you more questions. I should mention that Marissa and I are both on the Australian Smart Communities board together, and it's been really great to get to know you, Marissa, and I can't believe I've never asked about your background before, so I'm glad you came on the podcast to tell us all about it.
Thanks, Zoe.
No worries. Okay, well, let's jump into the next question, which is what sparked your interest in the smart community space?
So I think that smart cities are really a natural extension of my previous work. So the way a space works can really benefit so many aspects of somebody's life. So the interaction of the built and natural environments being vital to the health of an individual and the community. And by using emerging technologies, we can help to build those places in the best way possible. And then using sensors to collect data, we can constantly tweak and adapt them to improve. Smart city techniques can be used to evaluate projects, reduce costs, alleviate negative impacts, and become more responsive to the communities in which we work. So it just flowed on naturally from the work I've always been doing.
Yeah, cool. So what is a smart community to you?
I think a smart city is a place that works for those that use it. So, and at the same time, not doing any harm to other aspects of life that make life worth living, such as our environment, our future, the well-being of others, and the interactions of everyone who uses that space. I really believe that smart cities use data in an ethical manner, of course, to constantly improve our environment, and not just the physical environment, but the activities and interactions that occur in those spaces, including social interactions and economic exchanges.
Interesting. So why do you think that this concept is so important?
I think it's vital to creating a more livable community. I don't think most people want a smart city per se. They want a great community with or without technology. And great communities are usually some mixture of vibrant community life, healthy environments, strong economies, and good corporate and government leadership. So I believe the smart city concept is important as a methodology rather than an outcome, really about ways of achieving those bigger, important goals that every community has, of constantly reviewing how things are going and adjusting to the changing world.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think people need a smart city per se, but they want a great community to live and play and work in.
Yeah, and smart cities are a great way of achieving that using, emerging technologies and all the data we can get our hands on to help build them.
And I like what you said about with or without technology. That was a big thing that came up when I was in Barcelona. We asked the community what they wanted, and if they say, we want a playground, then we look at the other data and things, and then we take some action and we keep going around that circle. But it's actually a kind of difficult process for somebody who's in a role of, say, a smart city or smart tech officer or something like that, who has this program to outlay all this technology, that when he asks the community or when she asks the community and they say, oh, actually, we just want a better playground or something like that, to not be able to roll out all this smart tech at the get-go. But I also think it's important now. It's another thing in Barcelona that we're talking about, that we're asking the community where we want to go or where they want to go. So it's like getting on a plane. So you say, oh, yep, I want to go. I buy a ticket to Barcelona from Australia. And you get on the plane. You're not going to tell the pilot which way to fly. You're just going to take your seat and enjoy the experience along the way. And at the end, we'll get off in Barcelona. So I think there's like this intentional engagement is really important. So then we can kind of build these or create these places that people really want to be. But it's not necessarily that the community is going to give us all the answers. We need to do some of our own, well, a lot of our own thinking ourselves, being professionals working in this space.
I agree 100%. And I really think it comes down to how we define the word smart. So I think we can do smart policy and smart decision making, and it doesn't always have to be about the technology, although often the technology can help us make those decisions, or it can give us additional information to consider. And our policies can be built in a way that allows innovation to occur, whether that is using technology or not. So I think there's multiple ways of approaching it.
Yeah, I agree. So how do you think Australia is currently embracing this smart community concept?
So I think we've really jumped on board, and I think we're really at a turning point at the moment. I think there's real impetus for change and adopting new ways of achieving the goals I mentioned earlier. Currently, there's lots of different organisations and communities testing new technologies, collecting new information and trying to work out which of all the things that are being tested is making a difference. And really believe that we're on the precipice of real change. As different communities and cities focus on the things that matter most to them, we're all learning and benefiting from each other's work. And as long as we can maintain the focus on learning rather than self-promoting, I believe really great things can happen in the not too distant future.
How important do you think local government's role is in this smart city concept?
I think local government's work is probably one of the most important aspects of the work. So whilst there might be legislative and policy decisions at other levels of government, and certainly they have a role to play in funding allocation, local government is the group on the ground actually making a real difference, really testing different technologies, different ways of working, and seeing what the outcomes are for real people in the real world.
Yeah, I agree. They're kind of at the coalface of it. And ideally, they have the closest impact to the community or the closest relationship with the community is what I'm trying to say. And I think you're right. State, federal government all have their role to play as well. And I think it's not someone's more important or less important, but the things that local government have to deal with on the daily can really be enriched and enhanced using this kind of, like you said before, smart city or smart community as a methodology rather than a physical thing.
I think you just raised one of the most important points, and that's our relationship with our communities. So going back to what you said earlier about the way we engage our communities and opening up their sphere of knowledge to include things that may not even exist yet is really important. But we're the people on the ground who know how they move about a space, how they interact with places, how they go about their daily lives, and therefore we're best placed to make those transitions easier and smoother and increase their livability.
And I think going back to the community and the citizen and this idea of smart citizen, for want of a better word, but that's what we're going to use at the moment. They're already smart, like citizens are already smart. They have all this knowledge that a local government or planners, state government, the people trying to make these decisions or making these decisions, that's the information that they want. So it's just about giving tools So then we can let them tell us the information as well as collect that information and then ethically, obviously use it to make better decisions in this space.
Yeah, and that's a really great concept. And when you think about being in your hometown, in an area you know very well, it is the local residents and the local business people and the visitors to the space who know the secret city nooks or the best shortcuts or how to find a really great parking spot. And that's knowledge that we can share with everyone else to make the experience better for everyone.
Just picking up on what you said, I think culture is one of the words I would use for that. Those unwritten rules in a way of, oh, well, this place has the best coffee, but you won't be able to read that on Yelp or whatever. It's just that you've been there this many times and this barista's the nicest or whatever. I don't know. But those little local nuances that obviously you can't share everything, but it's just kind of like opening up. And they're obviously very simple examples, but other things like that you wouldn't know that can really help other people make better decisions and even change people's lives really, without being too dramatic. But if you find out things that then can help you get a better job or a higher level of income, then you can really build the life that you actually want rather than just kind of going, oh, well, this is the status quo. So this is how I work and this is where I work and these are the hours I work and this is what I get paid. Actually opening up those different thoughts that people can have to make their lives as well as their community's lives better.
That's exactly right. And those little tidbits of information about if you want to go to this shop, this is the best time to do it and this is the best route to take and you'll pick up a parking spot in this location. Those little things that make your life easier all really add up to an enjoyable experience living and working in particular places, whatever the nuances of those places are.
Okay, well, tell us about some of the things that you've been working on.
So here at Georges River Council, we're working on a number of smart city projects. They're all centred on public space and how people use them. And the very brief background to that is that we're living in a rapidly densifying area and there's a lot of pressure on public space. So we're looking at ways to make public space more productive in the sense that more people can use it without conflict or without it feeling too busy. So making the space enjoyable and feel like a big, wide open space outside of your unit or apartment or house in such a way that you can also interact with other members of the community and develop those strong bonds that give you a sense of community and belonging. So that's our key focus at the moment.
Yeah, cool. That sounds really interesting. And maybe we should talk a little bit about what we're doing at ASCO.
Yeah. So there's some exciting things happening at ASCO at the moment. We're working on a number of key focus area in conjunction with and on behalf of our members. So looking at some aspects that really help communities to embed the smart city methodology into their area to achieve whatever their community goals are. Looking at helping organisations really work towards becoming more agile and more responsive to emerging technologies and changing policy directions, being able to pick up issues and run with them rather than reacting to them, and breaking free of some of those, I guess, those silos about who does what and making the outcomes more fluid and more achievable. And I think that's really important to enable communities to aim for whatever it is they want to aim for. So whilst everyone might want to be happy and have a strong environment and a good local economy, what that looks like is different in each different area. So building the skills of organisations to be able to assist their communities rather than doing it for them. So working more collaboratively together to help that happen.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of that co-creation, which is a bit of a buzzword, but what that really means is actually working with the community rather than doing things to them. And I think about it when like in the developing country senses and the developed country sense, no one likes to be kind of said, here's your new tool that you need, and now you have to use it, even though the old tool was fine for them and that it's now increased their, travel time or something like that. So these little things that aren't thought about before we kind of do a lot of these things. And what I think is missing in the kind of overarching conversation in Smart City is the impacts or assessing the impacts that technology can have. We all know that it has impacts, like that's obvious, but how do we actually assess those so then we can get more of the positive, less of the negative, and really be able to say across the board whether it was a success or not, or even it had these impacts or not, because I think success and failure probably aren't the right words we need to be using. But I think it's really important that the trust element is there. So trusting that you can get the right information, real information, and that all the people at the table, or all the parties at the table, actually have a common goal and trust each other to be able to work towards that. Something I really think is important, particularly for local government, is that having the right people seated at the table and different people seated at the table, they won't all look the same because our communities don't all look the same. And then how can we then move towards what we're trying to achieve, which, will change day to day, but ultimately we'll have this kind of goal and vision of creating better places for people. And I think that, we can't do it alone. No one government, no one industry, no one organization can do it. So how do we kind of nurture those collaborations? So that was my very long way of saying, coming around the collaboration piece, or even the integration piece, because I think it's even more than collaboration. Someone said to me recently, for local governments and councils, they've got these increasing customer expectations, which, take with whatever you will. But then we've got these decreasing budgets, which again, take whichever you will. And the bit in the middle is actually the kind of smart bit, right? So how do we actually bring those together rather than creating more costs and more things that people don't actually want, but actually bridging that gap between what can be achieved and the expectations of our communities?
Well, I think that to answer your question goes back to how you introduced it. So for me, the two most important points are the basis for how we move forward. And the first is generating that trust. And that can be really difficult, especially between organizations, because trust is really about individuals and relationships between individuals. And so finding that balance between things like openness and privacy of individual or intellectual property, that may be one of the most difficult hurdles to overcome. So when we talk about gathering data and how that affects privacy of individuals, but also working with other organizations who may well have intellectual property. So I think that the focus of that is really developing a framework for that trust to sit inside. So whether that's some sort of written agreement or contract, but then it's really about the relationships of the individuals involved. And the second part is finding that balance between the claims from the community, between someone should do something about this issue and, oh wow, we've become a nanny state, and finding that balance. And I think that balance in the middle is that co-creation piece that you mentioned. So it's about collaboratively working on what are we actually going to focus on and what sort of solutions are we going to look at and how are they going to be implemented, which includes how they're funded and how they're monitored and who gets to see that information and then who gets to respond to it. So that true collaboration really comes from finding that balance between all of those different aspects. And a big part of that is having a common purpose and a common goal and being open and honest about the way we're working towards that. And I think that will be different for every community and every group of people working on solving a community's challenges.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it kind of leads to the next question, which is, how do you think that we can better integrate across, the different disciplines, governments, academia, and industry?
I really think that piece about coming together for a common purpose is really important. So if we have organizations, wherever they come from, and whether they're government, not-for-profits, or corporations, if we're actually working to solve an issue, then we can do that together within a common framework. So we can all play our role, whether that's talking with the community and engaging with them, supplying really useful new technology, accessing data sources and analysing them for insights, or coming up with innovative solutions, that together is the best way to make that happen.
No, I agree. And I think that everyone's got something different to bring to the table, which is really important to realise that it's not actually, one, we can't, but two, it's not useful for everyone to be a generalist. So talking about every little thing and trying to understand every little piece of the puzzle, because I think sometimes we need that, I don't know what the term is. I've heard it called CEO mindset, where you know enough about everything to make it run, but actually you need to make these really big decisions. So you can't actually know the nitty-gritty detail of every single thing that's happening and going on around the place. And I think it's really important that when we're talking this smart community, that not everyone is going to have all the knowledge that everyone else has, because that wouldn't be useful. but honouring what people do bring to the table is really important in that integration and collaboration piece.
I agree with you. That's absolutely vital. And I think one of the things we get hung up on in the smart cities world is the data and using the data and data-driven decision making. But I truly believe that data is just one lens at which we can look through things, and we really need to combine multiple lenses to really understand the story of what's happening and why it's happening. So the views of the people, using that space or moving about in an area, the expectations of the broader community and the impacts of any changes that you might want to make on them, and also the political context. So what is the current focus? What are our financial constraints? What does the legislation say, and what direction are we heading in are all vital. And to see things through all those different lenses, you need people who experience that issue in all different types of ways sitting around the table. So I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Okay, let's talk about trends. What are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Oh, that's really interesting. And I've been really struggling with this because the obvious go-to here is looking at some sort of emerging technology and what's happening in that space. But for me, I think it's more that we're beginning to see a real shift towards examining the why. So why do we want this shiny new technology? Why is this data being collected? Or why are people making these decisions that result in a certain outcome? Just as examples of delving that little bit more deeply. I think we've spent a lot of time getting excited about the next breakthrough and the next thing that's going to be rolled out, but practitioners are really starting to realise that there is already so much choice in the marketplace that it's difficult not to be overwhelmed by that. So, we can narrow down our choices and our focus by really looking at what we actually want to achieve and being very clear about how that piece of tech or that data set is going to help us get there, or it's going to help us measure whether we got there or not. So I really think this is evident in many of the discussions that we're having at ASCO, both at the board level and with our members at the moment. So we're considering things like internal capability and strategic alignment as vital precursors to an effective technology rollout. Looking at if you don't embed smart cities into the way you work and into your decision-making processes and evaluations, then it won't matter how great the technology is or how great that piece of smart infrastructure is if it's not there to do things that the community actually want it to do or to help them go about their day-to-day lives more seamlessly.
Yeah, I was thinking while you were talking about smart cities not negating just good, I don't want to say planning, but good planning and decision-making, I suppose. And if we don't have those things, or if we're already not focusing on those things, no piece of technology will really help us in achieving this kind of smart city, smart community thing. So it has to go hand in hand with good decision-making principles or ethos or ideology, but then using those tools to help us do that rather than what's this shiny piece of thing that we can add to our community that people might get excited about for 5 minutes and then it's finished because it didn't actually solve any problem. So starting with that problem. And I think that is an emerging trend that we're not talking about enough, that it's actually about solving problems. I don't want to say it's not about like this utopian view of, well, this is what's possible if we have a smart city, but it's actually about solving the real problems for people, because who we're actually designing this smart city for, or who has a right to this smart city, is something we need to talk about more, which kind of feeds into what you were saying, which is solving the problems or having good decision-making practices already and using smart city as a framework rather than this physical flashy thing that we're going to add on as kind of a bolt-on.
Yeah, and I think it's about, you can have both. So if you do have that vision of that shiny new utopia, how you get there are those small incremental steps that help people in their day-to-day lives rather than artificially building something that no one's ready to live in quite yet. So bringing people along with you is vitally important, and that includes the people working on smart cities projects. So there's no point having a separate little unit who works on it when the rest of the organisation has no idea how to do that kind of stuff. It needs to be embedded across the way people work and the decisions that they make for it to have any real impact on the community.
No, I agree. I think even if it is a separate innovation arm or some kind of, away from business as usual to get people thinking about it. And that way you can allocate the right funding, time, budget, resources. But if it doesn't integrate back in and break down the silos that, exist quite strongly within a lot of our, local governments and organizations, it's never going to achieve what it should or what it's supposed to achieve. And I think it's actually real danger, because then people get jaded by this whole thing and then go, oh no, throw their hands up in the air and, oh no, it doesn't work. So we're never going to look at that again. We're just going to keep doing business as usual, which we can't keep doing business as usual, because we're going to end up somewhere where we really don't want to be.
I think that's exactly right.
That's so great. Thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Zoe.
I just have one last question, which is, how can people connect with you?
Well, that's pretty easy. You can get in touch through the Australian Smart Communities Association. All of our contact details are available on the website and our social media sites, or through the usual channels like LinkedIn.
Yes, excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on to the podcast. And I look forward to chatting again soon.
Thanks for having me, Zoe, and I also look forward to talking with you further.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter @SmartComPod. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.